would just fit into them as well easily, or are we locked into open text because of the way the data is stored and it would be impossible to change, so to speak? Do you understand my question? Am I phrasing it right?
No, I do. No, that's a good question. There are other enterprise solutions out there that provides enterprise solutions, whether through an IBM solution or other solutions. If we are to consider our alternative or a replacement, we'll have to look at the whole file structure and to see if it is a simple migration from A to B. And also it will come with a considerable capital cost to replace. So it's not as simple as, would it fit? It should fit, because these are best practice standards that actually retain information inside the repository of an enterprise system. So to answer your first question, there are other solutions. This is not the only solution on the market. There are other solutions. How the migration will look like, I can't speak to that right now.
Thank you. I think I understand that, but I guess that's the concern of certain items that become very difficult to go out and tender once you're locked into structures. The cost of changing to a new one, you'd have to save a lot of money to deal with the costs, as I would understand it, of switching to another piece of software. You know, it's like using WordPerfect and then going to Microsoft Word. All of a sudden, your documents don't all look the same. They don't all, there's a lot of either labor and or translation that needs to be done, which would be quite a cost to shift with companies, if I'm understanding correctly.
That is correct. And Gary, they utilize the enterprise content management system quite a bit. And maybe he can offer you a comment or two on how they're using it. But it is embedded into the corporate records line of business.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more insight there. We are using it. It's more than just a content management system. It's our full classification and retention schedule as well. So we're putting documents into the system, and it's providing us the audit reports and purge reports at the end of the year. We started last year putting more information in, such as the Police Service Board reports, and then making them accessible electronically to everybody, so we're not having to store them on shelving units anywhere in the service. We're doing it for our physical objects as well. We have duty books that are being stored in the unit on shelves, and it tells us where they are, gives us a full audit tracking system when somebody signs out a duty book and then when it comes back in again. So it's the foundation of the enterprise content management system, and we continue to grow on it, adding more files and folders into it every year.
Thank you for that. I think I understand that. I was just more interested in the idea that Member Bonham brought up about saying competing with other pieces of software, and what it would mean if we said, oh, we're going to leave open text and go to Acme, who's going to do the same, who has a software that does the same thing. I was more concerned about the transition and whether it's even practicable to do a transition, or, you know, whether, in other words, going out to tender may not yield as much of anything as what I'm thinking, if I'm understanding it right, but I'm looking to be corrected if you definitely have more knowledge of this stuff than I do.
You know, you are correct, but I think if I understood Member Bonham's question is on the support piece. You know what? Do we continue doing business directly with open text? Obviously, there's pros and cons. There's advantages of doing that. They're dealing with the creator of the solution, or do we look at a partner that can provide a similar or like services, and it is a benefit to do that? And I believe, Member Bonham, this was your question.
I'm sorry, the reference here was maintenance renewal. So I'm assuming that we wouldn't have to change the architecture if we changed the service provider that would maintain the architecture and update it. That was the thrust of my concern. Thank you.
One last question I have, and maybe for the Chief, it might be Mr. Holden might be better to answer this one. In somebody requesting a FOI request through the service, of which some of the records are embedded in a police occurrence report and some might be embedded in what has been referred to as corporate records. Does this system have the capability of doing the redactions and producing a redacted copy of the material that you send them, and keeping track of what the original looked like, and also the redacted version going out in case we are an appeal comes in through the FOI Privacy Commissioner in Toronto? Or do you have separate software for that?
That's a very good question. That's specifically what we're looking at it for to do. So we were at a conference a couple months ago, and that's exactly what we're hoping it's going to do in the future for us. It can't do it today, but it's going to. It's called a case file. So we have a lot of unstructured data throughout the service, and it's in several legacy systems all over the place in different applications. This is going to manage everything for us, so I can do a search on right across the service eventually. It'll pull all the files into the one case folder and allow me to redact it, keep an original document as well as a vetted copy. And it'll have the audit trail on it as well. So we don't have that functionality today, but that's what we're looking at going forward, and OpenText can provide us that.
The software going forward does have the capability of doing the redaction on digital records, keeping track of what was changed, what the original was, and then producing the material that would go back to the requester, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I know I put the cart before the horse on this, so we did vote to approve it, which we would normally have done now, so I don't need to call that again. So if everyone's satisfied with that, we'll move on to the next board item, which is number 4 on the agenda, and that is the Information Technology Strategic Plan. I'll turn that over to the acting chief to take us through that, or how he wishes to proceed.
I'll provide some opening remarks, and then I'll likely turn it over to either Akram or Deputy Chief Forty. First of all, I want to thank Akram and his team for the work that was done in preparing the strategic plan. A lot of work, and what we've really tried to do is overlay the strategic plan for IT with the overall business plan for the Police Services Board, just to make sure that they're in sync with one another. I think they've done a very good job. It's a different approach than has been done in the past. If you have any specific questions, I'll ask Akram to provide some further details.
I'll turn it over to Member Gale first.
Okay, are they doing a presentation, or I've got a number of questions here? Do you want me to just start firing away?
Do you want to? Are you going to take us through on a high-level sort of overview? I know you talked about this about 2 months ago, I think, when you were sort of giving what I call a high-level direction on sort of some of the future stuff, and I see a lot of that incorporated back here. I have not had the chance to marry this back up to the business plan, but I think I have the confidence in the acting chief that he said that's what you've done, and you're able to compare what was in the business plan globally with the service and how the IT dovetails into that. And I think without spending a lot of time trying to mimic or trying to quote audit back into that, I'm satisfied with that. So if you're going to do a presentation, that's fine. If not, then I would just turn it over to questions, which I have some, but I'll start with board members first.
Questions? Okay.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, I'll pick off a section here, and then if anybody else has a question on that same section, they can, because I've got 3 different sections I have questions on. And the first one is the P25 radio system, and maybe Akram's going to answer this, but it might be the chief answering. Page 6, yes. And if you recall, Chief, 2.5 years ago, we did the road tour. I did about amalgamating backup 911 and things like this. And it all had a lot of bearing brought to it because of the P25 radio system, and St. Catharines and them had to adapt to it. So I'd just like a high level on who's sharing the services now and how it goes now, and our future too, who's coming with our systems, whatever you can tell us. If you can't tell us, if it's confidential at all, who's sharing something, please do.
No, great question, thank you. Tim Room, our public safety radio manager, had been actually quite active with Niagara Falls Fire and St. Catharines Fire. What do we know for a fact, or for sure, that we are almost at the last phase right now with having St. Catharines Fire and Niagara Falls Fire to come on the system. The plan for them to join the radio system right now as the first phase is anticipated by the end of the year or in January, February of 2018.
Are you talking backup or the system?
We're talking about the voice radio system.
Okay.
So they are at final discussions with Motorola right now to finalize the fire proposal and get the pricing. Not exactly. So a lot of the fire services have their own standalone radio system, but the dispatch piece is actually integrated to dispatch to their local fire services for a fire call. But Fort Erie, for example, have their own tower and their own equipment that receives a dispatch call from St. Catharines Fire. Niagara Falls Fire only dispatches for Niagara Falls. But you've got the other 11 municipalities receive their fire dispatch from St. Catharines. So they're kind of two separate projects right now.
Okay, thank you for that. If anybody else has, I have two other sections, but if anybody else has any questions on that.
Just sort of to follow up on that, now I understand what's happening here. So we would have to basically issue an MOU with costing and equipment list, let's say to Niagara Lake or Fort Erie. Let's say Fort Erie takes 2 base stations and 50 portables. We would have to have that all listed out, what the recovery cost is and everything else. So right now you only have that piece of it for Niagara Falls as a municipality and a piece of it for St. Catharines. Even though St. Catharines dispatches for others, St. Catharines would not have the I'll say basically the authority to say to Fort Erie, you've got to join our radios, physicality radios as such. But I think in the long term, they would probably see some advantages to having a much more unified or better radio system. I remember having a discussion with Joe Matthews probably about this time last year, about trying to come up with a standardized pricing, which I think you've done like a model. Was there not some work done on what I would consider to be a standard MOU? Because we're basically providing a service out to these agencies, and I wouldn't see there being too much tweaking between, let's say, what we offer to Niagara Falls or St. Catharines from a MOU legal perspective. Was there not some work done on that?
No, you're correct. So the Niagara Parks Police or the Niagara Parks Commission MOU that we have established is our standard framework. That is correct. Now, there may be some other items that will be added to a standard MOU, but we did share the framework with St. Catharines Fire to begin building it based on a standard. But I wanted to make a comment into your earlier comment. So we had developed a standard pricing framework, which is based on subscribers per fire service. St. Catharines Fire manages the chargebacks for their dispatch services back to the municipality. And the discussions we're having with St. Catharines Fire is, do we maintain the same bidding model? So I'll give you one example. The St. Catharines Fire and Niagara Falls Fire chargeback is straightforward. That's right back to the primary agency. But if Fort Erie, for example, comes back and wants to join the radio system, the pricing model doesn't change. It's still by subscriber, bear the annual cost that is derived, and it was a $50 per radio cost that we've agreed. What would happen is if Fort Erie Fire comes on, we have one choice: to bill the town of Fort Erie directly, or we actually bill our fee back to St. Catharines, and we collect from St. Catharines. And then in return, St. Catharines bills the municipality plus the additional fees that they charge back for the dispatch service. So that will be defined clearly in the MOU. But at the end of the day, the chargeback that we do for all the fire services is very consistent. It's very structured, very systematic, and very consistent.
I would like to hear, quote, Woody's opinion on that one piece, because when you're dealing with a municipality, you're dealing with a legal entity, which has every right to basically engage with us as an entity for pricing rather than going. I mean, they could. I mean, they could go through St. Catharines, and St. Catharines ends up as basically the sort of a financial controller for this. But it would be interesting to see whether this doesn't muddy the waters to such an extent or make it more complex. But I'll wait for, I mean, this is fairly early in that process as to what would happen to, let's say, a Fort Erie or Niagara Lake.
We'll make sure that when those MOUs come back to us, that they're vetted through Woody.
Thank you. Member Gale.
No other questions on that? No. Okay, I'd like to go to page 7 then, the e-ticketing. And I'm happy, and I'm hoping your answer through you, Chief, to Akram, I guess. October 31st, 2017, service-wide implementation. Are we on site for that? So on November 1st, 2017, our efficiencies, everything that goes good with this, because I've been asked by other councilors too. We've heard enough about e-ticketing. When's it going to be up and going?
Through Mr. Chair. So we continue to roll out the e-ticketing per district. So we're very pleased to report that we have rolled out e-ticketing in the initial pilot phase to our traffic unit. The full training was conducted. We've also rolled it out to Grimsby. So in Grimsby, they're conducting tickets electronically. We're in the process of doing St. Catharines, one district right now, and we have to hit each platoon. And then Niagara Falls, I believe, in the next couple of weeks, and we're looking to conclude the full service rollout across all districts.
All I need is an answer saying November 1st, 2017. Are we going to be up and running everywhere like this report says?
No, that's the target we have right now, that we're looking to conclude it.
And it looks good to you right now?
I mean, the front line are ecstatic. The region is quite pleased with the results, and we're moving forward. So we're
okay. I'm going to report it to other councilors that we look like we're on site for November 1st. If that doesn't work out, could you report to the chief or get back to me on that, please?
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if we had a bit of a delay, just because we're just catching up with the odd one or two officers who maybe were not available, but we're proceeding every week with the additional rollouts.
Perfect. Anybody else have any questions on that? And on e-ticketing, okay. My last one is on the disaster center, which is on page 8. Yeah, page 8. And what was my question on that? I wonder if this is up to date on this report, because it says the region is now at final construction stage, and is expected in November 2016. So on November 2016, this report is just a box from a year ago, and we're up and running, or not up and running, but we're available for this data center for November 2016. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So just basically, when we provided a status update on the previous, the performance of the previous plan, the board approved the funding to actually allow us to establish the IT disaster recovery site. The region is just, as I noted, they're in the final phase of rebuilding their data center, because they were actually building one, and then we're looking to go in to begin to provision our disaster recovery IT infrastructure in Q1 2018.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what you just said. To build a new data center to host NRPS, anticipated completion of the data center is expected in November 2016. Is it completed now?
Speaking to the region, they're just about to light it up right now, but they're almost done. They're still in the process of provisioning their primary data center at the region.
Okay, so the chair says some of this is confidential, but I'm just concerned about a report says November 2016. We're just about to light it up. I get concerned of these reports, but
if I may provide a very brief background. So when we went
whatever
back,
you can say publicly.
Yeah, no, this was a public report initially back in when we requested the approval of the remaining funds. We looked at options to potentially build.
Deb just said to me, should that say November 2018 on that report? Is that where my confusion lies? Page 8.
My apologies. That could have been a typo on my part. It's November 2017. My apologies.
November 2017.
For the region to be ready.
Okay,
thank you.
You need not explain. I was just wondering why we're a year late on this.
My
and
apologies.
We're just
That's my mistake.
Okay, I'm good. Thanks.
Any other questions from members? I'm just going to drill back on the data center, and there's some other questions I will probably ask in a confidential piece on this. What provisions have you made to segment our data from a physical security perspective of the servers that are going to be housed there? Are you implementing some type of a caged approach?
That's one of the options we've discussed with the region, that for specific switches or routers that we may have to cage to satisfy the RCMP requirements, especially for the ones that deal with a CPIC circuit. But what we'll do is we'll make sure that as we're ready to proceed forward, we have to make sure that we update our NASCAR application with the RCMP to let them know that we're co-locating some of the equipment, like even the fiber lines. Our switches that talk back to our data center for disaster recovery have to be protected. So the region has made provisions that we can actually have the cabinets that are going to house our equipment that will be locked, and we potentially look at a biometric or scan to actually allow us to know if somebody opened the cage or somebody tried to, would be alerted right away to satisfy the security for the RCMP.
Okay, thank you. Some new points in the report. Some members of the board, we had a chance to look at the RTOC, I think it was in June at the end of that meeting. And I know we were sort of beginning to ramp that out. Is the RTOC now in full operation?
I'll turn it over to Sergeant Tara Henderson, who's been looking after the RTOC. She can give an update.
So effective July 5th of this year, we went into full operations in a pilot capacity, and we're anticipating that we're going to run a one-year pilot project for the RTOC. So we're operational right now, currently Monday to Friday, 8 to 4, and assisting on calls for service, and we're looking at building the model throughout the process of the next year.
But if we had some type of an incident of, I'll use the term major nature,
yes,
at 2 in the morning on a Saturday, you would be able to bring in staff very rapidly to get the RTOC in operation to handle that?
Yes, we would.
Okay. And I take it then, as part of your design of this 1 year, you're looking at senior command staff's knowledge of the RTOC and how it functions and how they would dovetail into being part and parcel of that, is taking a command role on an incident from the RTOC?
That is correct.
Thank you. The other questions I have deal with an item that was discussed, I think, when Chief McGuire was here. The push to talk over P25 from a iOS or Android device, and I think there was some material circulated, or I came across some material on it. How close are we to implementation of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that was part of our 2018 capital budget request. So we've had some discussions with Motorola, and they're ongoing right now with regards to that.
So if those discussions are successful, you would then see in 2018 that would be rolled out?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Other members? Member Stewart.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, just back to the RTOC for a minute. I'm just wondering, without details, because I think that might get into confidential piece, but are we proceeding with getting agreements with other private and public cameras that are out there as far as integrating with the system?
We are currently working on a camera expansion project, yes, as part of our pilot.
Okay, not seeing any more questions. I have a mover and seconder, please, for this. Moved by Member Monham, seconded by Member Stewart. All in favor of this moving forward? And I must commend the service for putting together what I would consider a concise and well laid out document. Would like to see some sort of an annual reporting. This is a 3-year plan, but I would like to see some type of an annual reporting as to progress. I think it's important to maintain being on track with this. There's some very what I would consider very important components in this that would improve our efficiency. Also from a public safety perspective, especially when I see the next generation 911. Again, I think these are vital pieces of public/emergency service, and keeping us up to date on an annual basis. Or if you say, 3 months from now we're going to roll out X, if the board can be informed of that because I think all of us here, if we implement this as according to this plan, are all good news stories and moves this service forward in IT and improves our policing within the region. So, is there any other business from the service or board members? Chief?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just clarifying, we can certainly report back to you on an annual basis as to the status of the progress as we're rolling along. As you can see, there's certainly a lot of components. Technology certainly drives policing as it does most businesses today. Is there a particular month that works best for your committee for us to report back annually?
Well, if I look at the business plan, because this basically is the IT component of that business plan. If you went through the business plan and extracted all the different components, not everyone is solved by IT, or not everyone has an IT component. Our business plan has been in effect now for about 1.5 years, so we got about another 1.5 years to go on it. That usually comes up for discussion at the end of November, December. So if I was to try to, and there's report backs on that, I would think if the IT, I know this is, issued today, but if IT could report back at the same time the business plan annual report back is. Now, I know that means you're going to be reporting back in the next 60 days, basically, which probably doesn't make that much sense. But I would think for, when we get into 2018, if we get something back in April, which would be sort of like 6 months from now, and then you get into the annual process in November, December, which is when the business plan comes back for report back, then this could be part of it.
No, absolutely, and this is very consistent with the structure of the IT strategic plan. I think everything will fall in line, but I agree with you, it's very consistent, and that should be no problem.
Chief, is that something? Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, we'll work with that.
Okay. So we're going to adjourn this meeting. Sorry, Member Gale.
I'm going to ask, through you, Chair, to the Chief, in November, we should have e-ticketing going and things like this, and by then we should have our full command team in place, and I'll be requesting that you, the three of you, show up at Regional Council, and I'd like you to expand on the e-ticketing at that time then. So hopefully it goes off without a hitch on November 1st. The heat's on you for that, and then it's not up to me reporting, but these are good news items, so if we can.
Yeah, that's not a problem. And e-ticketing is, like you say, is a good news story. While the three of us were out doing the Back to School initiative on day after Labor Day, we had conversations with a number of members of our traffic enforcement unit who are using e-ticketing, and as Akram alluded to, they are ecstatic about it. It is a time saver from the input perspective. And again, from a data input perspective on the back end, it's a time saver for us as well. So it'll be a great news story once it's fully implemented and functional.
Well, again, whatever you can provide at that meeting, if you have an officer that wants to explain it from a high level thing at that Regional Council meeting in November, I'm just coming up with an example, but by then everybody will be in place and report good news on that, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the public component of this meeting is adjourned. Once our video feed shuts down and everything, we'll move into confidential to discuss a few items. Thank you.